When the Duke chose her sister at the altar, society called it a scandal. When she walked back into that ballroom 6 months later as a foreign duchess, they called it impossible. This is the story of a woman who was thrown away like yesterday's newspaper and became the one story London could never forget. Stay with us until the end to see how one humiliated bride turned rejection into revolution. And tell us in the comments, what city are you watching from? Hit that like button if you believe the best revenge is becoming someone they never imagined you could be. The fog that morning wasn't the soft, romantic kind poets wrote about in their parlors over brandy and self-importance. It was the thick, choking sort that crawled up from the Thames like something diseased, turning London into a maze of gray shapes and muffled sounds. The kind of fog where you couldn't see your own future even if it was standing 3 feet in front of you, which, for Elara Whitcomb, turned out to be prophetic. She stood in the vestibule of St. Margaret's Cathedral, her hands ice-cold despite the expensive white gloves that had taken 2 seamstresses 4 days to stitch. The wedding dress, French lace over silk so fine it whispered when she breathed, had cost more than most families in Seven Dials earned in a year. Every pearl button down her spine had been sewn by hand. Every inch of her had been prepared, polished, perfected for this singular moment. 22 years. 22 years of training for a role she was about to perform for the last time. Miss Elara? The attendant's voice was soft, nervous, young. Probably her first aristocratic wedding. They're ready for you now. Elara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her mother's words from that morning still echoed in her skull like a death knell disguised as encouragement. Remember, darling, you are a Whitcomb. We do not stumble. We do not falter. We fulfill our purpose with grace. Purpose. What a word for the transaction about to take place. The doors swung open, and the cathedral revealed itself in all its orchestrated glory. 600 candles. She knew because her mother had approved each one personally. White roses shipped from the ducal estate in Yorkshire, their scent almost sickening in its sweetness. And seated in those pristine rows, like ravens dressed in silk and judgment, sat everyone who mattered in London society. The Duchess of Marlborough in the 3rd row, her jewels catching the candlelight like shards of ice. Lord Pemberton and his insufferable wife, who'd been placing bets at their club about how long the marriage would last before the Duke took a mistress. The Honourable Mrs. Ashford, who'd spent the last 3 months spreading rumors that Elara was too cold, too clever, too something for a man like Duke Rothermere. And there, at the altar, standing with his back rigid and his hands clasped behind him like a military officer awaiting orders, was Edmund Rothermere himself. Duke of Rothermere, master of 30,000 acres, owner of properties from Scotland to Cornwall, and, as of 3 weeks ago when the engagement was formally announced, her future. The organ began. Handel, naturally. Nothing less would do. Elara began the walk. Each step was measured, practiced. Left foot, pause. Right foot, pause. Eyes forward, spine straight, smile serene but not too eager. Eagerness was common, and a Whitcomb was never common. The dress seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. The veil might as well have been a burial shroud. She could see Edmund now, his profile sharp against the candlelight. Handsome, certainly. Powerful, absolutely. Cold as a January midnight? Without question. They'd spoken perhaps a dozen times since the engagement, mostly at dinners orchestrated by their parents. Conversations that had all the warmth and spontaneity of contract negotiations. Because that's what this was, really. A merger. Whitcomb's strategic brilliance and social standing combined with Rothermere wealth and title. Their children would be unstoppable. Their alliance would reshape the power structure of the peerage for a generation. Elara would simply have to stop existing as a person and start existing as a function. She reached the halfway point. The faces blurred together now. Too many eyes, too much judgment, too much weight pressing down on her lungs. But she kept walking. What else could she do? This was the life she'd been raised for. Every music lesson, every language tutorial, every torturous hour learning to pour tea and make conversation and smile through discomfort. All of it had been preparation for becoming the perfect aristocratic wife. And she would be perfect, even if it killed her. 75 feet from the altar now, 60, 50. Edmund still hadn't turned around. That should have been her first warning. 40 feet, 30. A ripple went through the crowd. Whispers like dry leaves skittering across stone. Elara's step faltered, just barely, just for a heartbeat, but she caught herself. Whitcombs don't stumble. 20 feet. Edmund turned, but he wasn't looking at her. His eyes, those cold blue eyes that had never once warmed when they rested on her face, were fixed on something behind her. Someone behind her. Elara felt her blood turn to ice water. She knew. In that instant, with every particle of her being, she knew. She turned. There, being escorted down a side aisle by Edmund's personal attendant, was her sister. Cordelia. Beautiful, biddable Cordelia. Sweet Cordelia with her golden curls and her gentle laugh, and her complete lack of anything resembling a complicated thought. Cordelia, who'd spent the last 3 months sighing about how romantic it was that her sister was marrying a duke. Cordelia, who'd helped her choose the wedding dress. Cordelia, who was now walking toward the altar in a pale blue gown that matched her eyes perfectly. The cathedral had gone silent, not the peaceful silence of reverence, the shocked, hungry silence of a crowd that sensed blood in the water. Edmund stepped down from the altar. He walked past Elara like she was a piece of furniture, like she was air. He walked directly to Cordelia. "Miss Cordelia Whitcomb," his voice rang out, clear and formal and utterly devoid of shame. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The world tilted. Elara's vision grayed at the edges. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, a desperate drum that seemed to be asking the same question over and over. How? 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 Cordelia's face, that sweet, innocent face, crumpled into what might have been confusion or might have been the worst acting Elara had ever seen. "But, Edmund, Elara is a mistake," Edmund said calmly. "A logical choice that became illogical upon further reflection. You, my dear, are what I should have chosen from the beginning." The whispers erupted. 600 people all trying to speak at once, the sound building like a wave about to crash. Elara stood frozen in the center aisle. The bride. The abandoned bride. The jilted, humiliated, discarded woman in the impossibly expensive dress that suddenly felt like a costume for a play that had just been canceled mid-performance. Her mother's voice cut through the chaos. "Elara! Elara! Get out of there! Now!" She couldn't move. Her legs had turned to marble. Her lungs had forgotten how to pull in air. Cordelia was crying now, pretty, delicate tears that somehow made her more beautiful. I never meant... Elara, I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was going to... Liar. The word came out of Elara's mouth before she could stop it. Raw, unpolished, completely inappropriate for a woman of her station. The cathedral fell silent again. Cordelia's eyes widened. "Elara, how could you say... You knew..." Elara's voice was getting stronger now, fed by a rage so pure it felt like swallowing lightning. "You knew, and you helped. All those fittings, all those conversations. You were measuring me for a coffin while pretending to help me plan a wedding." "Miss Whitcomb," the bishop's voice, trying to regain control. "Perhaps it would be best if we... If we what?" Elara spun on him. Pretend this didn't happen? Shuffle me out a side door so we can get on with the real ceremony? Is that what you're suggesting, Your Eminence?" The bishop's face turned the color of raw liver. Edmund's voice was ice and acid. "Elara, you're making a scene." She laughed. Actually laughed. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling like breaking glass. "I'm making a scene? I'm making a scene?" The words came out too loud, too sharp, too real. "You just replaced your bride at the altar in front of 600 witnesses, and I'm the one making a scene." "You're overwrought." Edmund's tone was the same one you'd use with a hysterical child. Understandable given the circumstances. "But dignity, Elara. Remember your breeding." "My breeding." The words tasted like poison. "My breeding." "Yes. Let's talk about breeding. I was bred for this. Literally bred, like a prize mare, to stand here and smile and fulfill my purpose. And my purpose apparently was to be humiliated so that you could make a point. What point would that be?" Edmund's voice was cold, bored even. "That you can." Elara ripped the veil from her head. The pins tore at her carefully arranged hair, destroying hours of work in seconds. That you have the power to destroy someone completely and face absolutely no consequences. That women are interchangeable, disposable. That one Whitcomb daughter is as good as another, and if you change your mind, well, there's always a spare. Her mother materialized at her elbow. Elara Whitcomb, control yourself this instant. Why? Elara turned to face her mother. Charlotte Whitcomb, pillar of society, architect of this disaster. What exactly do I have left to lose, mother? My reputation? Gone. My future? Stolen. My dignity? Currently being shredded in front of everyone who matters in London. What exactly should I be protecting right now? Your family's name. The family that arranged this? Elara gestured wildly at the altar, at Edmund, at Cordelia, who was now sobbing into a handkerchief that Edmund was gently pressing into her hand. The family that groomed me for 22 years to be the perfect aristocratic bride, and then, what? Decided to trade up? Was I too difficult, mother? Too opinionated? Did I commit the cardinal sin of having thoughts? You committed the cardinal sin of being unpleasant. Her mother's voice was a razor wrapped in silk. A man wants warmth, Elara, softness, compliance. You offer analysis and judgment and an opinion on every blessed thing. Cordelia offers sweetness. The words hit like physical blows. So that's it. Elara's voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous. I was too much myself, and that made me worthless. Not worthless. Her mother's hand was on her arm now, nails digging in through the expensive lace. Simply unsuitable for this particular match. Now, we will leave. We will go home. We will... No. Excuse me? I said no. Elara pulled her arm free. I'm not going home. I'm not going anywhere with you. You sold me. You packaged me up and sold me, and when the buyer changed his mind, you didn't even have the decency to warn me. Elara, you're being hysterical. I'm being rational for the first time in my life. She turned to face the crowd. 600 faces, all watching her destruction with the hungry fascination of people witnessing a public execution. And I want all of you to remember this. Remember what you saw here today. Because this is what your world does to women. This is the system you all uphold. We're taught from birth that our only value is in making a good match. And then when that match decides we're defective merchandise, we're expected to disappear quietly. Elara! Her mother's voice was sharp with panic now. But Elara wasn't done. She turned back to Edmund and Cordelia. They made a pretty picture. The powerful duke and the sweet young thing. A much better story than the intellectual older sister with her inconvenient opinions. I hope you're very happy together, she said, and meant every word as a curse. I hope you build a beautiful life full of meaningless conversations and decorative children and absolutely nothing of substance. I hope you bore each other to death over 40 years of perfect propriety. Cordelia flinched. Edmund just smiled, a small cold smile that said he'd won. And he had. In every way that mattered to the world watching, he'd won. But as Elara gathered her ridiculous dress in both hands and began walking back down that aisle, not running, not fleeing, but walking with her spine straight and her eyes forward, she made herself a promise. He'd won the battle. The war was just beginning. The cathedral doors slammed behind her with a finality that sounded like the ending of a life. Maybe it was. The Whitcomb townhouse in Mayfair was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Pristine, cold, perfect. A museum dedicated to appearances. Elara stood in the foyer, still in her wedding dress, while the servants tried very hard to pretend they hadn't heard what happened. They'd heard. Everyone in London had heard by now. Miss Elara, Peters, the butler, cleared his throat delicately. Shall I have Martha help you out of your... Shall I draw you a bath? No. Her voice sounded strange. Hollow. Where's my father? His study, miss. He's asked not to be disturbed. Of course he had. Geoffrey Whitcomb was many things. A brilliant strategist, a ruthless businessman, a man who'd clawed his way from genteel poverty to the edges of real power. But a comforter of devastated daughters? That had never been in his repertoire. Elara climbed the stairs to her room. Each step felt like walking through water. The dress weighed 1,000 pounds now, a monument to wasted preparation. Her room was exactly as she'd left it. The bed made. The books on her nightstand, forbidden novels she'd read in secret, philosophy texts her governess had declared too vigorous for feminine minds, the window that looked out over the square where she'd watched the world go by for 22 years and never been allowed to truly touch. She stood in front of her mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger. White dress, ravaged hair, eyes that looked like something had died behind them. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, the culmination of everything she'd been raised to achieve. Instead, it was the day she'd been publicly discarded like a used handkerchief. The rage came then, not the hot, explosive kind from the cathedral. This was different, colder, deeper. The kind of rage that didn't burn, it calcified into something hard and permanent. She grabbed the nearest thing, a crystal vase, a gift from some distant aunt, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass exploded, shards everywhere. 7 years bad luck, the superstition said. Elara laughed. Too late. Oh, my dear girl. She spun around. Aunt Margaret stood in the doorway, looking utterly out of place in the Whitcomb perfection. Margaret Hartley, her father's older sister, had never quite fit the aristocratic mold. Too tall, too loud, too opinionated, too divorced. The family scandal who'd been married at 19, divorced at 22, and had spent the last 30 years living exactly as she pleased in a townhouse in Bloomsbury. The Aunt Elara's mother barely acknowledged. The Aunt Elara secretly adored. What are you doing here? Elara's voice cracked. I was at the cathedral, 7th row, behind that insufferable Pemberton woman. Margaret crossed the room, glass crunching under her sensible boots. I left when you did. Figured you might need someone who wasn't going to tell you to smile through it. Mother says I was too difficult, that I drove him away with my opinions. Your mother, Margaret said carefully, is a brilliant social strategist and a terrible human being. The two things are not mutually exclusive. Elara's laugh was more of a sob. He chose Cordelia. Sweet, simple Cordelia, who's never had a complex thought in her life. Cordelia is a beautiful, empty-headed creature who will make him a perfect duchess. She'll host his dinners, bear his children, and never once challenge him on anything more controversial than the color of the drawing-room curtains. Margaret's eyes were fierce. Is that really what you wanted? To spend your life being decorative and docile? It doesn't matter what I wanted. That was my purpose. And I failed. You didn't fail. You escaped. Margaret gripped her shoulders. Elara, look at me. That man, that cold, calculating bastard, just did you the greatest favor of your life. By humiliating me in front of everyone who matters. By showing you exactly what you would have been signing up for. A lifetime of being evaluated, judged, and found wanting whenever you displayed a shred of independent thought. Margaret's voice was sharp, urgent. You think today was painful? Today was nothing compared to 40 years of slowly suffocating in that man's expectations. But now I have nothing, no prospects, no future, no script. Margaret smiled. No predetermined path, no role you have to play. For the first time in your life, Elara, you're free. I'm ruined. In the eyes of people whose opinions are worth less than yesterday's fish wrapper. Margaret pulled her into a fierce hug. Come stay with me. Bloomsbury is full of poets and philosophers and radical thinkers who won't give a damn about your scandal. We'll figure out what comes next. Mother will never allow it. Your mother doesn't get a vote anymore. Margaret pulled back, eyes blazing. You're of age. You have a small trust from your grandmother. Not much, but enough to live on if you're careful. You can walk out of this house right now and never come back. Could she? The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Elara looked around her perfect room, her perfect prison. Everything in it had been chosen by someone else, approved by someone else, deemed appropriate for a young woman of quality. None of it was hers. Help me out of this dress, she said quietly. Margaret's smile was fierce and proud. With pleasure. They cut her out of it. The French lace, the silk, the pearls, all of it destroyed by Margaret's embroidery scissors. The sound of fabric tearing was the most satisfying thing Elara had ever heard. When she stood in just her chemise and stockings, surrounded by the ruins of her wedding dress, she felt lighter than she had in years. Pack light, Margaret advised. Only what matters. Everything else is just set dressing for a play you're not performing anymore. Elara packed her books, her journals, The secret stash of money she'd been saving from household allowances. Not much, but hers. A few practical dresses. None of the ball gowns, none of the jewelry, none of the things that had been purchased to make her into someone else's perfect wife. "Ready?" Margaret asked. Elara took one last look at her room, at the life she was leaving behind. Yes. They made it down the stairs, past the shocked servants, and almost to the door before her mother appeared. "What do you think you're doing?" "Leaving." Charlotte Whitcomb's face went white, then red. "You cannot be serious. Leave." "Go where?" "You're ruined, Elara. Your only hope of salvaging anything from this disaster is to stay here, stay quiet, and hope that in a year or two someone might overlook— Overlook what? That I was publicly discarded? That my own sister stole my fiancé?" Elara's voice was calm now, eerily calm. "Or that I had the audacity to object to my own humiliation." "You're being childish. I'm being honest. For the first time in my life, I'm being completely, brutally honest." She met her mother's eyes. "You raised me to be a commodity, a valuable one, certainly, well-educated, well-mannered, well-connected, but still a thing to be traded. And when the buyer rejected me, you didn't comfort me. You didn't rage on my behalf. You told me I was too difficult." "You are difficult." "Good," Elara smiled. "I plan to become more so." "Your father will cut you off." "Then I'll live on less. Aunt Margaret has graciously offered me a home, and I have grandmother's trust. I'll manage." "You'll be alone, unmarried, scandalous. No decent person will receive you." "Then I'll find indecent people. I hear they're much more interesting anyway." She walked toward the door. Margaret followed, a protective shadow. "Elara!" Her mother's voice was sharp with panic now. "If you walk out that door, you are choosing to destroy this family's reputation. Everything we've built, you destroyed it when you agreed to let one daughter be sacrificed for another's advancement." Elara didn't turn around. "Goodbye, Mother. Please give Cordelia my congratulations on her upcoming nuptials. I'm sure she'll make a lovely duchess. She certainly makes a perfect thief." The door closed behind them with a finality that should have been terrifying. Instead, as Elara climbed into Margaret's waiting carriage and felt the wheels begin to roll, taking her away from Mayfair and everything she'd ever known, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. Broken, battered, furious hope. The old Elara Whitcomb had died at the altar that morning. Whoever she was about to become, she was going to be someone society would never forget. Margaret's townhouse in Bloomsbury was everything the Whitcomb residence wasn't: cluttered, warm, alive. Books spilled from shelves onto tables, onto chairs, onto the floor in teetering stacks that seemed to defy physics. The walls were covered in paintings that would have scandalized Elara's mother: nudes, abstracts, political cartoons. The air smelled of ink and coffee and freedom. Elara stood in the doorway of what would be her room, gripping her single traveling case like a lifeline. "It's not much," Margaret said, bustling past with an armful of linens. "Used to be my studio before I decided I was a terrible painter and a moderately decent writer. But it has a window, a desk, and most importantly, a lock on the door that only you control. A lock that only she controlled. Such a small thing. Such an enormous thing." "It's perfect," Elara whispered. That first night, she didn't sleep. She lay in a bed that wasn't hers, in a house that wasn't hers, in a life that was suddenly, terrifyingly, her own responsibility. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Edmund's face, his cold smile, the way he'd looked through her like she was glass. By morning, the scandal had metastasized into something malignant and unstoppable. Margaret brought the newspapers to breakfast along with coffee so strong it could strip paint. She didn't try to hide them. "Better you see it now," she said simply. "Better you know what you're facing." "Ducal disaster. Rothermere. Abandons bride at altar," screamed the Times. The society page had turned it into Gothic melodrama. The heartless older sister, so cold and unpleasant that even a duke couldn't bear to shackle himself to her. The sweet younger sister, reluctant and innocent, practically forced into accepting his proposal out of pity for her devastated sibling. That version had Cordelia's fingerprints all over it. The Morning Post was worse. Sources close to the family suggest Miss Elara Whitcomb's unsuitable temperament had long been a concern. She was always too headstrong, reports one intimate. Poor Duke Rothermere tried to overlook it, but even love has its limits. Love, Elara said flatly, staring at the word. We spoke 12 times. 12 conversations about weather, property management, and his mother's rheumatism. If that's love, then hate must be downright passionate. They're rewriting the story to make sense of it. Margaret poured more coffee. Humans need narratives. A powerful man cruelly discarding one woman for another doesn't fit the narrative they prefer, so they're turning you into the villain. Makes it tidier. I'm the villain for having opinions. You're the villain for being inconvenient. Margaret's eyes were sharp. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What could she do? She was ruined, unmarriageable. A cautionary tale that mothers would tell their daughters for the next decade. Don't be too clever, darling. Remember what happened to the eldest Whitcomb girl? The calling cards started arriving that afternoon. Not invitations, rejections. Lady Pemberton regretfully could no longer include Miss Whitcomb in her Thursday salon. Mrs. Ashford found herself forced to withdraw the invitation to her summer house party. The Duchess of Marlborough wrote 3 pages explaining, in excruciating detail, why Elara's presence at any future events would be untenable given the delicate sensibilities involved. Elara read each one without expression. Margaret watched her like a hawk. Say it, Elara finally said. Say what? That I should have kept my mouth shut at the cathedral, that I made everything worse by fighting back. I was actually going to say that you should burn those letters, preferably in the fireplace, but I'm open to more dramatic venues if you're feeling theatrical. Despite everything, Elara smiled. You're not going to tell me to apologize? To grovel? To beg for acceptance back into their good graces? I'm going to tell you that their good graces are worthless. Margaret leaned forward. Elara, listen to me. Those people? They're not your world anymore. They've excommunicated you from a church you never wanted to attend in the first place. So stop treating it like a tragedy and start treating it like an escape. An escape into what? I have no prospects, no future, no script, Margaret interrupted. We've established this. Now comes the interesting part, writing a new one. I don't know how. Nobody does. That's what makes it an adventure. Over the following days, Margaret's house became a haven and a proving ground. In the mornings, Elara would wake to find intellectuals, artists, and radicals gathered in the drawing room, arguing about everything from politics to philosophy to whether Shakespeare had actually written his own plays. They were brilliant, chaotic, completely inappropriate by Mayfair standards, and they didn't care about her scandal. Oh, you're the jilted bride, said a painter named Thomas Ashworth when Margaret introduced them. Heard about that. Rothermere's an ass. Have you read Wollstonecraft's Vindication? You should. You'd like it. It's angry. Just like that. No pity, no judgment, no carefully worded euphemisms, just recognition that she'd been wronged, and an assumption that she'd want to think about it rather than weep about it. Elara devoured the book in 2 days. Then she devoured the rest of Margaret's library, texts on women's rights, political philosophy, economics, science, all the things that had been carefully kept from her because they might make her difficult. You're making up for lost time, Margaret observed, finding her at 2 a.m. surrounded by books. I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not busy being what everyone else needs me to be. Elara looked up, exhausted and exhilarated. Is that naive? It's the sanest thing I've heard in years. But London wasn't ready to let her disappear into peaceful obscurity. The gossip evolved from scandal to character assassination. Pamphlets appeared on street corners, crude illustrations of a shrewish woman driving a man into the arms of an angel, cartoons in shop windows showing a bride with a forked tongue and horns, street ballads about the Mayfair Medusa, who turned men to stone with her cold heart. Elara tried to ignore it. She really did. But ignoring poison doesn't make it less toxic. It was Margaret who finally forced her hand. You need to be seen, she announced over breakfast one morning, 3 weeks after the cathedral disaster. Absolutely not. Elara, if you hide, you confirm their narrative, that you're ashamed, broken, defeated. I am defeated. You're recuperating. There's a difference. Margaret pushed a heavy cream envelope across the table. The Hastings Literary Society is hosting a salon tomorrow evening. Discussion on the role of women in modern education. You're coming with me. Those people will eat me alive. Those people are academics and freethinkers who spend their evenings debating ideas instead of destroying reputations. Half of them are women who've faced worse scandals than yours and survived. You'll fit right in. Margaret, I'm not asking, darling. I'm telling. You can spend the rest of your life hiding in this house, or you can walk back into the world and remind them that you're still here, still thinking, still breathing, still refusing to disappear just because they've decided you should. The Hastings Literary Society met in a drafty hall in Camden, far from the glittering ballrooms of Mayfair. When Elara walked in beside Margaret, she felt every eye turned toward her. But the expressions weren't the ones she expected. No pity, no contempt, just curiosity and, from a few faces, something that looked like respect. "That's her?" whispered a young woman near the door. "The one who told off Rothermere at the altar?" "Told him off?" her companion corrected. "She eviscerated him. I heard she called him a calculating bastard in front of 600 people. I didn't actually use that phrase," Elara found herself saying. Both women jumped. Then the first one grinned. "But you thought it, right?" "Every word." They laughed, welcomed her, made space for her in their circle like she'd always belonged there. The discussion was fierce, brilliant, everything she'd been starved for. A professor from Cambridge argued that women's education should focus on practical skills. A radical writer countered that practical skills without intellectual foundation created servants, not citizens. Elara listened, absorbed, finally unable to stay silent. "But aren't we assuming that education has the same purpose for everyone?" She heard her own voice, stronger than it had been in weeks. "Perhaps the question isn't what women should learn, but who gets to decide? When we create curricula designed to make women suitable for marriage rather than suitable for life, we're just building more elaborate cages." Silence. Then a tall woman with steel-gray hair and fierce eyes spoke up. "Exactly right. I'm Dr. Helena Winters. You must be the scandalous Miss Whitcomb." "I'm trying to retire from scandal and focus on thought instead." "Good luck with that. Scandal is more interesting." Dr. Winters smiled. "But I like the way you think. Have you considered writing?" "Writing what?" "Your perspective. Your experience. Do you know how many women are raised exactly like you were? Groomed for a single purpose, then destroyed when they fail to fulfill it? Your story matters." "My story is humiliating." "Your story is political. There's a difference." The idea took root that night and grew like wildfire. Maybe she couldn't change what had happened, but she could control what it meant. She spent the next 2 weeks writing. Not a memoir, she wasn't ready for that kind of exposure, but an essay. A careful, furious examination of how society raised women to be ornaments and then punished them for having the audacity to be human. Margaret read the first draft and wept. "It's too raw," Elara said nervously. "It's perfect. And it's going to make people very, very angry." "Then maybe I shouldn't." "You absolutely should. The right kind of angry is how change starts." Doctor. Winters helped her place it with a progressive journal. It ran under a pseudonym, E.W., but everyone knew who'd written it. The responses came fast and vicious. "Bitter spinster lashing out at her betters," wrote one critic. "Unnatural woman spreading poison," claimed another. The society pages, which had finally started to move on to other scandals, dragged her back into the spotlight with renewed vigor. But other letters came too. From women who'd been through similar situations. From mothers who'd watched their daughters broken by the marriage market. From wives trapped in loveless matches who saw their own stories reflected in her words. "You've started something," Margaret said, reading through the stack of correspondence. "I've started a war I can't win." "Maybe, but you're fighting it, which is more than most people have the courage to do." The breaking point came at a musicale hosted by Lady Thornbury, one of Margaret's oldest friends. A progressive event? Theoretically safe. But society had a way of infiltrating even the most carefully curated spaces. Elara was standing near the refreshment table, attempting to be invisible, when she heard a familiar laugh. Cordelia. She turned. There, across the room in a dress that cost more than most people earned in a year, stood her sister. And on her arm, smiling that cold, satisfied smile, was Edmund. They hadn't seen her yet. Cordelia was holding court with a cluster of women who were complimenting her ring, a massive emerald that caught the candlelight like a piece of the sun. It was all so unexpected, Cordelia was saying in that sweet, breathy voice. I never imagined Edmund would choose me. I felt terrible about Elara, of course, but sometimes these things are simply meant to be. How is your sister? One of the women asked with the kind of false concern that barely masked avid curiosity. Oh, we haven't spoken. Mother says she's staying with that eccentric aunt in Bloomsbury. Quite the fall from grace, isn't it? But I suppose when one makes such a scene, there are consequences. The rage came back, the same cold, calcifying rage from the cathedral. Elara started walking, not running, not fleeing, walking with purpose and precision directly toward her sister. Margaret caught her arm. Don't, it's not worth it. Let go. Elara, I said let go. She pulled free and kept walking. The crowd parted. Conversations died. By the time she reached Cordelia, the entire room had gone silent. Cordelia's eyes widened. Elara, I didn't know you'd be... Didn't you? Elara's voice was soft, dangerous. Or did you just hope I'd have the decency to stay hidden while you parade around in stolen jewels? They're not stolen. Edmund gave them to me. Edmund gave them to his fiancée. You just happen to be wearing her ring. I'm his fiancée now. Cordelia's chin lifted, a flash of something that wasn't sweet at all. The wedding is in 3 weeks. St. Margaret's again. We thought about changing venues, but why should we? It's not like you'll be there. No, I won't. I'll be too busy writing about how women like you build your happiness on other women's corpses. Edmund stepped forward. That's enough, Elara. Is it? I'm just getting started. She turned to face him fully. Tell me, Duke Rothermere, how long were you planning it? The switch, the humiliation? Did you enjoy it? Standing at that altar, knowing what you were about to do? I made a difficult decision based on new information. New information? She laughed, the sound sharp as broken glass. What new information could you possibly have discovered about me that you didn't know during our engagement? That I have thoughts, opinions? That I'm not content to be decorative and silent? You're proving my point beautifully. His voice was ice. This display. This is exactly why you were unsuitable. For what? For marriage? For polite society? For the great honor of being your duchess? Elara's voice rose despite her best efforts. You're right. I am unsuitable. I'm unsuitable for a life spent pretending that intelligence is a flaw and submission is a virtue. I'm unsuitable for a marriage where I'm expected to be grateful for my own diminishment. I'm absolutely, completely unsuitable for you. Then we're in agreement. Edmund's smile was cruel. I upgraded. You're free to live whatever small, bitter life you've carved out for yourself in Bloomsbury. We'll be in Yorkshire, running an estate, raising children, building a legacy. I believe I made the right choice. So do I. The words came out calm, certain. You would have destroyed me, slowly, methodically, over decades. You would have taken every part of me that mattered and filed it down until I was smooth enough not to cause you discomfort. Cordelia will let you do that. I never would have. She turned to her sister. Enjoy your legacy, Cordelia. I hope it keeps you warm at night when you realize you married a man who views his wife as property that can be exchanged at will. At least I'll be married. Cordelia's voice was vicious now, the sweetness stripped away. At least I'll have a home, a position, a future. What do you have? A rented room and a reputation in tatters. In 10 years, I'll be a duchess with children and power. You'll be a forgotten scandal, alone and unwanted. The words hit like hammer blows. But Elara didn't flinch. You're probably right, she said quietly. I probably will be alone. I probably will be unwanted by people whose acceptance requires me to erase myself. And I will take that over spending one day in your shoes. She walked away. This time, no one stopped her. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. Margaret found her sitting on the steps, shaking. That went well, Margaret said dryly. I just burned the last bridge. Good. Those bridges led nowhere you wanted to go anyway. Margaret, what am I going to do? She's right. I have nothing. No prospects. No future. No... You have yourself. Margaret sat beside her. Intact. Uncompromised. Still capable of thought and feeling and growth. That's not nothing, Elara. That's everything. It doesn't feel like everything. It feels like I'm drowning. Then swim. A carriage rolled up, an expensive one with a crest Elara didn't recognize. The door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, dark-haired, with eyes that looked almost black in the lamplight. Dressed impeccably, but with a foreign cut to his coat. When he moved, it was with the unconscious confidence of someone who'd never questioned their right to exist in any space they chose. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his English accented with something that sounded Spanish. "I'm looking for Dr. Helena Winters. I was told she might be in attendance this evening." "Inside," Margaret said. "And you are?" "Rafael de Aragon, Duke of Valentia. A foreign duke, at a progressive musicale in Camden." The universe, Elara thought, had a twisted sense of humor. "I'll fetch her," Margaret said, then paused. "This is my niece, Elara Whitcomb." Something flickered in Raphael's dark eyes. Recognition. Ah, the woman who wrote the essay. The Gilded Cage. "You read that?" Elara's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I read everything I can about your country. I find it fascinating, all this power and wealth and sophistication, and yet you treat half your population like expensive furniture." He tilted his head, studying her. "The essay was good. Angry, but good. Anger can be useful when properly directed. Currently, my anger is directionless and overwhelming." "Then you need a better target." He smiled. It transformed his face from austere to something warm. "I'll fetch Dr. Winters myself. But Miss Whitcomb, don't let them win by making you small. The world has enough small people. It needs more fury." He disappeared inside. Margaret was grinning. "Well, that was interesting. That was bizarre. That was a foreign duke telling you to stay angry. I like him already." They sat in silence for a moment. Inside, the musicale continued. Cordelia and Edmund were probably still holding court, building their perfect narrative. But out here, in the cold London night, Elara felt something shift. The drowning feeling receded just slightly. She wasn't saved, she wasn't fixed, but she was still here, still breathing, still capable of fury. Margaret was right. Fury, properly directed, could be useful. "I want to go back to the salon," Elara said suddenly. "The Hastings Society?" "All of them. Every intellectual gathering, every radical discussion, every space where ideas matter more than pedigree. I want to learn. I want to think. I want to become so undeniably myself that when they look at me, they can't see anything else." Margaret's smile was fierce and proud. "Now you're talking." They stood. Elara's hands were still shaking, but her spine was straight. She'd been broken at the altar. She'd been cast out by her family. She'd been rewritten as a villain in society's favorite cautionary tale. But she was still here, and she was just getting started. The weeks that followed turned fury into purpose. Elara threw herself into the intellectual circles of Bloomsbury with the kind of desperate energy that came from having nothing left to lose. Every salon, every debate, every gathering where ideas were currency and scandal was merely biography. She attended them all. At first, people watched her like she was a curiosity. The jilted bride turned radical thinker. The fallen woman who refused to stay fallen. But curiosity became respect when they realized she could hold her own. Your argument assumes that economic reform can happen without dismantling the class system entirely. She challenged a Cambridge economist at a discussion on workers' rights. But how can you redistribute wealth when the very laws governing property are designed to concentrate it in the hands of those who already have it? The room went quiet. The economist blinked, then smiled. "That," he said, "is exactly the question we should be asking." Rafael de Aragon became a regular presence at these gatherings. She'd see him in corners, listening more than speaking, those dark eyes taking in everything. When he did contribute, it was with observations that cut through pretense like a blade through silk. "In Spain, we have a saying," he offered during a heated debate about women's education. "El que tiene boca se equivoca." The one who has a mouth makes mistakes. Your society's problem is that you only allow half your population to have mouths. How can you expect wisdom when you've silenced half the potential contributors? Elara found herself gravitating toward him despite her better judgment. He was dangerous, not in the way Edmund had been, all cold calculation and control. Raphael was dangerous because he saw her. Actually saw her. Not the scandal, not the ruined reputation, not the cautionary tale. Just her. "Why do you keep coming to these events?" she asked him one evening after a particularly contentious discussion on parliamentary reform. "You're a duke. You could be at any number of society gatherings where the wine is better and the conversation is less likely to end in philosophical fistfights. But the ideas are worse." He handed her a glass of terrible wine from the refreshment table. "I came to London to understand British power structures. Your society gatherings taught me nothing except that your aristocracy is very good at being decorative and very bad at being useful. These rooms, these teach me how change actually happens. Change doesn't happen in drawing rooms where radicals argue over tea. No, but it starts there." He studied her face. "You're different than you were a month ago. I'm angrier. You're focused. There's a difference." He paused. "I read your second essay, the one about marriage as economic transaction." She'd published it under her initials again, but with less anonymity this time. The backlash had been immediate and vicious. 3 major society hostesses had publicly declared her unwelcome in their homes. Her mother had sent a single letter, 2 sentences long. "You have made your choice. We have made ours." "Everyone read it," Elara said bitterly. "Half of London wants me burned as a witch. The other half thinks I'm too pathetic to bother burning." "I thought it was brilliant. Ruthless, but brilliant." Raphael's voice was quiet, intense. "You took your personal devastation and turned it into political analysis. That takes courage. Or desperation? I'm not sure there's a difference anymore." "There is." He set down his wine, untouched. "Desperation is random. What you're doing is surgical. You're dismantling the system that tried to destroy you, piece by piece, argument by argument. The system is too big to dismantle. Perhaps, but you can make it uncomfortable. You can force it to acknowledge its own cruelty." His eyes were fierce. "Do you know what power is, Elara? Real power? Money, title, the ability to destroy someone at an altar. No, real power is making people question whether the altar should exist in the first place." Before she could respond, Margaret appeared, her face tight with something that looked like controlled panic. "Elara, we need to leave. Now." "What's wrong?" "Your father is here." The blood drained from her face. Geoffrey Whitcomb didn't visit Bloomsbury. Geoffrey Whitcomb barely acknowledged that Bloomsbury existed. He was waiting in Margaret's study, looking utterly out of place among the books and artistic chaos. Still every inch the successful merchant who'd clawed his way into the edges of aristocracy through sheer ruthless intelligence. "Father." "Elara." His voice was clipped, businesslike. No warmth, but then there never had been. "I'll be brief. Your behavior has become untenable." "My behavior?" "Not the behavior of the man who humiliated me publicly or the sister who betrayed me. Mine." "Yes. Yours." He pulled out a newspaper, slapped it on Margaret's desk. Her latest essay, circled in angry red ink. These publications, these radical gatherings. You're not just ruining yourself anymore. You're damaging the family name. The family name survived Cordelia stealing my fiancé. It'll survive my essays. Cordelia elevated the family name. She's marrying a duke. You're associating with radicals and anarchists and writing seditious nonsense about dismantling marriage. I'm writing analytical truth about how marriage functions as economic imprisonment for women. You're biting the hand that fed you for 22 years. His face was hard, cold. "I built something from nothing, Elara. Do you understand that? I started with debts and determination, and I built a fortune, a position, a future for my family. And you're destroying it because you're angry that one transaction didn't go your way." The words hit like acid. Transaction. That's what I was to you. A transaction. That's what everyone is. Marriage, business, social climbing, it's all transactions. The people who pretend otherwise are either fools or liars. He leaned forward. "I'm here to offer you a choice. Stop the essays. Stop the gatherings. Apologize publicly for your behavior at the cathedral. Congratulate your sister on her marriage, and return home. I'll find you a husband, not a duke, obviously, but someone respectable enough, older, probably widowed, someone who needs a wife more than he needs an unblemished reputation. And if I refuse, then you're no longer my daughter. No hesitation, no regret, just cold calculation. I'll cut you off completely. No money, no family connection, no safety net. You'll be alone with whatever pittance your grandmother left you and your aunt's charity. The room was very quiet. You'd actually do it, Elara said slowly. You'd disown me because I won't pretend to be something I'm not. I'd disown you because you're actively working against the family's interests. This isn't about who you are, Elara. It's about what you're doing. They're the same thing. Then you've made your choice. He stood, brushed imaginary dust from his coat. You have until the end of the week. After that, you're on your own. He left. Margaret stood in the doorway, face pale. He means it, she said quietly. Your father never bluffs. I know. Your grandmother's trust is maybe 300 pounds a year. Enough to survive on if you're very careful, but not enough to live any kind of comfortable life. I know that too. Elara, I'm not going back. The words came out steady, certain. I'm not apologizing for refusing to be humiliated quietly. I'm not congratulating Cordelia on her theft, and I'm definitely not marrying some elderly widower who sees me as a charitable project. Then you're choosing poverty, uncertainty, a life on the margins. I'm choosing myself. Elara met her aunt's eyes. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing myself. Isn't that what you told me to do? Margaret's expression crumbled into something fierce and proud and terrified. I did, and I meant it, but you need to understand what you're walking into. I understand. She didn't. Not really. Not yet. The week deadline came and went. True to his word, her father cut her off completely. No money beyond the trust. No family recognition. Her name removed from the Whitcomb family Bible. Cordelia sent a single note. You did this to yourself. The intellectual circles rallied. Dr. Winters found her editing work for a progressive journal, poorly paid but steady. Thomas Ashworth commissioned an essay on women artists for a pamphlet he was publishing. Margaret reduced her rent to almost nothing. But London was expensive, and pride didn't pay for food. Elara learned what poverty felt like for women of her class. Not the desperate, grinding poverty of the East End. She wasn't starving or homeless, but the constant, gnawing anxiety of counting every penny, of mending her own clothes because she couldn't afford a seamstress, of skipping meals so her money would stretch further, of watching other women in beautiful dresses at gatherings and remembering when she'd taken such things for granted. You're getting thin, Raphael observed one evening at the Hastings Society. He'd become a fixture in her life without her quite noticing, appearing at discussions, walking her home when the debates ran late, bringing her books he thought she'd find interesting. I'm fine. You're not eating enough. Don't lie. I can see it. Food costs money. Money is something I have very little of. Then let me... No. She cut him off sharply. I appreciate the offer, but no. I didn't escape one form of dependence just to fall into another. It's not dependence. It's friendship. Raphael, you're a duke, a foreign duke with estates and wealth and power. I'm a disgraced woman living on 300 pounds a year and whatever editing work I can scrape together. If you start giving me money, people will assume I'm your mistress, and I'll have confirmed every terrible thing they already believe about me. So your pride is more important than your well-being? Yes. She met his eyes. Right now, my pride is the only thing I have that's actually mine. I'm not trading it for comfort. He looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he just nodded. I understand. But Elara, if circumstances change, if you need help, ask. Please. I won't need help. I'll manage. That was before the letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a private messenger. Heavy paper, formal seal, the kind of correspondence that announced itself as important before you even opened it. It was from the Duke of Rothermere's solicitor. Elara's hands shook as she read it, then read it again. Then a third time, because surely she was misunderstanding. She wasn't. Edmund was suing her for defamation. Her essays, according to his legal team, constituted a clear and deliberate attack on his character. While she'd never named him explicitly, The thinly veiled references to a powerful aristocrat who views women as interchangeable commodities were obviously about him. He was seeking damages in the amount of £5,000 plus a formal public apology and retraction. £5,000, more money than she would see in 15 years. Margaret read the letter, her face going white. This is retaliation, pure, simple retaliation. He knows you can't pay it. What happens if I can't? Debtor's prison if it goes to court and you lose, or bankruptcy, which is almost as bad. Either way, you're destroyed. I'm already destroyed. No, you're scandal. This would make you criminal. There's a difference. Elara's mind was racing. Can he actually win? I never named him. I was careful. Doesn't matter. Every person in London knows who you're writing about. A halfway competent barrister could make the case that you've damaged his reputation. Margaret's voice was grim. And Edmund can afford the best barristers in England. So what do I do? You could apologize, retract the essays, publicly state that you were speaking from bitterness rather than truth. That would be lying. That would be surviving. By destroying everything I've built, by proving them right, that I'm just a bitter, discarded woman lashing out at her betters. Elara's voice was rising despite her best efforts. Margaret, I can't take it back. Those essays are the only true things I've said in 22 years. Then you need a lawyer, a good one. With what money? We'll figure something out. We have to. The news spread through her circles like wildfire. Opinions split immediately. Half thought she should fight, turn it into a cause célèbre, expose Edmund's cruelty through legal battle. Half thought she should fold, apologize, survive, fight another day. Raphael showed up at Margaret's house that evening unannounced. I heard, he said without preamble, I'm hiring you a lawyer, the best in London. Absolutely not. Elara, no, I won't be in debt to you. This isn't debt, this is charity, pity. I don't care what you call it, the answer is no. His face hardened. So you'll let pride destroy you? You'll go to debtor's prison or bankruptcy rather than accept help from someone who actually respects what you're doing? If I let you pay for my defense, then I'm just another woman being supported by a powerful man. Everything I've written, everything I've argued for, it becomes meaningless. I become the kept woman people already assume I am. That's insane. That's reality. Her voice cracked. Raphael, don't you see? The moment I start depending on your money, your position, your power, I've lost. The system wins. I become exactly what they say I am. And if the system destroys you instead, then at least I'll know I fought it on my own terms. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was sad and fierce and full of something that looked like admiration. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. I'm the most desperate woman you've ever met. There's a difference. Is there? He moved closer. I think you're confusing stubbornness with courage. And I think you underestimate how many people would stand with you if you let them. People like you? Yes, people like me. His voice was quiet, intense. People who see what you're doing and recognize it as important, revolutionary even. You're not just fighting for yourself, Elara. You're fighting for every woman who's been told her value ends at the altar. Pretty words. But they don't change the facts. I have no money, no legal recourse, and no way to win this. Then don't fight it in court. She looked up sharply. What? Edmund expects you to either fold or fight legally. Do neither. Fight publicly. I don't understand. Your essays have an audience. People read them. People respond to them. Some with hatred, yes, but some with agreement. Some with recognition. His eyes were bright with something that looked like strategy. Edmund is suing you to silence you. So don't be silent. Write about the lawsuit itself. Make it a case study in how power silences dissent. Force the conversation into the public sphere where his money and his barristers can't control it. Margaret, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. That's brilliant and insane in equal measure. It's also dangerous, Raphael said, not looking away from Elara. If you escalate like this, Edmund will retaliate. He'll make your life hell. He has the resources and the connections to destroy you professionally, socially, legally. He's already doing that. This would be worse. Much worse. He'd have to, or he'd look weak. Let him look weak. Better yet, let him look cruel. Let him show the world exactly what he is, a powerful man using the law as a weapon against a woman who dared to criticize him. Elara's heart was pounding. Raphael, could this actually work? I don't know, but it would force the conversation. It would make him defend his actions publicly, and public opinion is harder to control than courtroom proceedings. She thought of the letters she'd received after her essays, the women who'd written to thank her for putting their experiences into words, the men who'd written to say they'd never considered how the system damaged everyone trapped in it. She thought of Cordelia, building her perfect life on the rubble of Elara's dreams. She thought of her father's cold dismissal, her mother's ultimatum. She thought of every single person who'd decided she should disappear quietly rather than exist loudly. I'll do it, she said. Margaret groaned. Of course you will, because a normal response to being sued would be too simple. I'll help you, Raphael said immediately. I have connections with publishers, radicals who'd be thrilled to distribute something this inflammatory. Why? Elara turned to face him fully. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. This isn't your fight. Isn't it? His expression was unreadable. I came to London to understand British power. You're showing me exactly how it works and how it breaks. That's valuable. That's an excuse. Perhaps. He smiled slightly. Or perhaps I simply hate bullies. And your Duke Rothermere is one of the worst I've encountered. She started writing that night. Not an essay, a manifesto. A detailed, furious examination of how Edmund's lawsuit was a perfect microcosm of how powerful men silenced women who threatened their narratives. She didn't hold back. Every conversation they'd had during their engagement, every cold dismissal, every moment where he'd made her feel like an inconvenient obligation, she weaponized it. She laid out exactly how the marriage system functioned as economic control, how women were raised to be perfect commodities and then discarded when they proved to have thoughts. And she named him, directly, no more thinly veiled references, Duke Edmund Rothermere, who had humiliated her at the altar and was now attempting to silence her through legal intimidation. Margaret read the draft and went pale. This is career suicide. I don't have a career to destroy. This is worse than career suicide. This is painting a target on your back and daring him to shoot. Good. Let him shoot. Let everyone see him do it. Raphael arranged for publication through a radical press that operated just on the edge of legal. The pamphlet, because it was too inflammatory for any mainstream journal, went out on a Friday. By Monday, all hell had broken loose. The newspapers exploded, some in outrage at her audacity, some in support of her argument. The society pages declared her the most dangerous woman in London. The radical sheets called her a hero. Edmund's response was swift and brutal. He increased the lawsuit damages to £10,000. He had his connections pressure every publication that had ever run her work. Half of them immediately severed ties. He made it known that any social gathering that welcomed her would be considered hostile to him personally. And then he did something Elara hadn't anticipated. He went after Margaret. The notice came from Margaret's landlord. Her lease, which had been month to month for 15 years without issue, was being terminated. She had 30 days to vacate. Who owns the building? Elara demanded, already knowing the answer. A holding company, which is owned by a larger company, which is, apparently, connected to the Rothermere estate. Margaret's voice was carefully controlled. He's going after anyone who supports you. Then I'll leave. I'll find somewhere else to stay. I won't let you lose your home because of me. With what money? And where would you go? I don't know, but I can't stay here and watch you pay for my choices. Elara, no! She was already pulling out her single trunk. This is my fight. You've done enough. She made it as far as the street before Raphael intercepted her. Where are you going? I don't know. Somewhere that won't endanger anyone else. That's not a plan. That's panic. Then I'm panicking. She tried to move past him. He blocked her path. Come to my townhouse. Absolutely not. Elara, if I move in with you, that's it. Every terrible thing they've said about me becomes true. The scandalous woman living off a foreign duke's charity. Do you understand what that would do? It would destroy any credibility I have left. You don't have credibility, you have fury and a brilliant mind and no safe place to put either. His voice was fierce. Edmund is escalating because he's losing, Your pamphlet is being discussed in coffee houses and drawing rooms all over London. People are questioning the system. You're winning, and that terrifies him. I'm not winning. I'm being systematically destroyed. Same thing sometimes. He grabbed her shoulders, forced her to look at him. Listen to me. You can let his intimidation work, or you can call his bluff. Show up at the Waverley Ball next week. She actually laughed. The Waverley Ball, the most exclusive social event of the season. I'm not invited. Even if I was, I'd be thrown out the moment I arrived. I'm invited. As my guest, you'd have every right to be there. Raphael, that's insane. It's strategic. Edmund and Cordelia will be there. All of society will be there. You show up composed and unapologetic, and you prove that you're not hiding, not ashamed, not defeated. I'll be humiliated. You'll be magnificent. His eyes were blazing now. You'll walk in there and remind everyone that you're not a scandal to be whispered about. You're a woman who refused to disappear when it was convenient for them. That's power, Elara. That's suicide. Maybe. But it's also the most interesting move on the board. She looked at him, this foreign duke who'd inserted himself into her disaster and refused to leave, who looked at her like she was brilliant rather than broken. Why are you really doing this? She asked quietly. His expression softened. Because I've spent my whole life in rooms full of powerful people who've never been challenged, who believe their wealth and title make them infallible. And I've watched you challenge everything, with nothing but your mind and your fury. You're the most extraordinary person I've ever met, and I'll be damned if I let them destroy you for it. The words hung in the air between them. The ball is in 6 days, Elara said slowly. 6 days. But I don't have anything appropriate to wear. I'll take care of it. Raphael, Mom, not charity, strategy. You can't walk into the Waverley Ball in a mended dress. You'll give them exactly the ammunition they want. You need armor. I'm providing armor. She should say no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming to say no. One condition, she heard herself say. This doesn't make me yours. I'm not your charity case or your mistress or your project. I'm walking in there on my own terms. On our terms, he corrected. Partners. Equal participants in the most dramatic evening London society has seen in a decade. You're insane. Frequently. He smiled, sharp and dangerous. Is that a yes? Elara thought of Edmund's cold satisfaction, Cordelia's smug triumph, her father's dismissal, every single person who'd decided she should vanish quietly rather than fight loudly. She thought of the woman she'd been 6 months ago, perfect, polished, prepared to disappear into someone else's expectations. That woman was dead. It's a yes, she said. Raphael's smile could have lit fires. Then let's give them a show they'll never forget. The dress arrived 2 days before the ball. Elara stared at the box like it might contain a coiled snake. Heavy black silk embroidered with silver thread in patterns that caught the light like starlight on water. No pastels, no demure whites, no virginal innocence. This was a dress designed to make a statement, and the statement was war. He has excellent taste, Margaret observed, running her fingers over the fabric. Or at least, his modiste does. It's too much. It's exactly enough. Margaret held it up against Elara's frame. You're not going to that ball to blend in. You're going to remind them that you exist. This dress does that. This dress makes me look like I'm trying to seduce every man in the room. Good. Let them think that. Let them assume whatever they want. You'll know the truth, that you're there to prove you're not afraid of them. The truth was more complicated. Elara was terrified. Not of the ball itself, but of what it represented. Walking back into the world that had cast her out, on the arm of a man who was becoming dangerously important to her, wearing a dress that cost more than she'd earn in a year. Every part of it felt like betraying the principles she'd been fighting for. But Raphael had been right about one thing. Hiding gave them exactly what they wanted. Her absence would be interpreted as shame, as defeat, as confirmation that she'd been broken. She refused to be broken. The morning of the ball, her father's solicitor appeared at Margaret's door with an offer. Drop the defiant stance, issue a public apology to Duke Rothermere, and Geoffrey Whitcomb would pay the lawsuit damages and welcome her back into the family fold. All she had to do was admit she'd been wrong. Tell my father, Elara said calmly, that I'd rather live in a gutter than purchase my comfort with lies. The solicitor's expression suggested he'd expected exactly that response. He said you'd say that. He also said to tell you that this is your last chance at redemption. Redemption from what? From refusing to be humiliated quietly? From using my mind? From having the audacity to survive his abandonment? She smiled, and it was sharp as broken glass. Tell him I don't need redemption. I need a world where women don't require saving from the consequences of having thoughts. After he left, her hand shook for 20 minutes. You could have taken it, Margaret said quietly. No one would have blamed you. I would have blamed me. That's enough. The afternoon brought another visitor. Dr. Helena Winters, carrying a leather portfolio and an expression that suggested she was about to deliver either excellent news or a death sentence. Your pamphlet about the lawsuit, she said without preamble. It's being reprinted. 5 different radical presses have picked it up. It's spreading beyond London, Manchester, Edinburgh, even Dublin. That's good, isn't it? It's inflammatory, and it's working. Dr. Winters pulled out a stack of letters. These arrived at the Journal, responses to your work. Most are supportive. Some are death threats, but that's progress in its own way. Elara took the letters with numb fingers. The first few were exactly what she expected, women thanking her for putting their experiences into words. The fourth one made her freeze. It was from a barrister's wife in Leeds, describing how her husband had used a similar lawsuit to silence a woman who'd exposed his affair. The fifth was from a governess who'd been destroyed professionally when she rejected her employer's advances, and he'd sued her for theft to cover his tracks. The sixth, seventh, eighth, all stories of powerful men wielding the law as a weapon against women who dared to resist. They're using the legal system as a cage, Elara said slowly, and you're exposing it. That's why Edmund is escalating, because you're making people question whether the cage should exist at all. Dr. Winters leaned forward. Elara, I need you to understand something. What you're doing is dangerous, yes, but it's also necessary. There are women all over England who are watching what happens to you and using it to gauge whether resistance is possible. I'm not trying to be a symbol. Too late. You already are. Dr. Winters' smile was fierce. So the question is, what kind of symbol do you want to be? The one who folded when threatened, or the one who walked into the lion's den and refused to flinch? That evening, Raphael arrived to escort her to the ball. He looked every inch the foreign aristocrat, perfectly tailored coat, diamond cufflinks, an air of casual authority that came from never having questioned his right to exist in any space he chose. He stopped dead when he saw her in the black dress. Is it wrong? Elara asked, suddenly self-conscious. Too much? I can change Don't. His voice was rough. Don't change a single thing. You look like you're about to go into battle. I am. I know. He offered his arm. Ready? No, but I'm going anyway. The Waverley Ball was held at the Duke of Waverley's residence in Belgravia, a palace masquerading as a townhouse. By the time their carriage pulled up, the street was clogged with vehicles depositing London's elite like precious cargo. Elara's stomach churned. Through the windows, she could see them, women in pastel silks, men in formal black, everyone carefully arranged to display their wealth and status. 6 months ago, she would have been one of them. Now she was the scandal they'd whisper about over champagne. You don't have to do this, Raphael said quietly. We can turn around right now. No shame in strategic retreat. There's shame in letting fear win. She took a breath. Let's go remind them I'm still here. The entrance hall was a study in calculated opulence. Crystal chandeliers that cost more than houses, marble floors polished to mirrors, and everywhere, people, hundreds of them, all turning to look as Raphael led her inside. The whispers started immediately. Is that... It can't be. The Whitcomb girl? Here? With the Spanish Duke? How shameless. I heard she's his mistress. After everything she wrote, she has the nerve to... Raphael's hand tightened on her arm. Not pulling her back, just steadying her, reminding her she wasn't alone. Lady Waverley materialized in front of them, her face frozen in the peculiar expression of a hostess torn between social protocol and personal outrage. Duke d'Aragon, how delightful to see you. Lady Waverley, thank you for your hospitality. May I present my companion for the evening, Miss Elara Whitcomb. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the chandeliers humming. Lady Waverley's smile was a masterpiece of controlled fury. Miss Whitcomb, I wasn't aware you'd be attending. Duke de Aragon was kind enough to extend the invitation. I hope my presence doesn't cause you discomfort. Discomfort. The word came out strangled. No, of course not. Though I must say, given recent circumstances, some might find your attendance here surprising. Some might find a lot of things surprising, Elara said pleasantly. The fact that I'm still standing, for instance, or that I haven't apologized for having opinions, or that I'm not hiding in shame because powerful men decided I should. Lady Waverley's face went through several interesting colors. Perhaps we should discuss this more privately. Why? I'm not saying anything I haven't already published. Elara's voice was calm, clear, carrying. People were gathering now, drawn by the confrontation like moths to flame. I'm simply a woman who refused to be discarded quietly. If that makes me unsuitable for polite society, then perhaps polite society needs to examine its own suitability. This is hardly the place, isn't it? This is exactly the place. All of London's elite gathered in one room, celebrating a system that works beautifully for some and destroys everyone else. Where better to discuss it? Miss Whitcomb, I must ask you to what? Leave? Apologize? Disappear? Elara smiled. I'm afraid I'm quite done doing what I'm asked. But please, don't let me interrupt your party. I'm simply here to remind everyone that the scandal they've been whispering about has a face and a mind, and absolutely no intention of going away quietly. She walked past Lady Waverley into the ballroom. The crowd parted like she was contagious. Raphael stayed beside her, a solid presence in the sea of hostile faces. That was magnificent, he murmured. Terrifying, but magnificent. I think I'm going to be sick. Not yet. Wait until we've made a full circuit of the room. The ballroom was everything excessive. Gilt, mirrors, enough flowers to deforest a countryside. And there, near the far wall, holding court like royalty, were Edmund and Cordelia. Cordelia saw her first. Her face went white, then red, then a peculiar shade of purple that would have been funny under different circumstances. She grabbed Edmund's arm, whispered something urgent. Edmund turned. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. His were cold, calculating, completely unsurprised. He'd known she'd come, maybe even counted on it. He excused himself from his circle and began walking toward her. The room went silent. Everyone watching, everyone waiting to see what would happen when the disgraced woman and the Duke who'd discarded her finally confronted each other in public. Raphael tensed beside her. Say the word and we leave. No, I want to hear what he has to say. Edmund stopped 3 feet away, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to maintain the pretense of civility. Elara, I'm surprised to see you here. Are you? I thought you'd expect exactly this. You sued me to silence me after all. Coming here is the opposite of silence. Coming here is a desperate attempt to remain relevant. His voice was pitched for the crowd, playing to them. I understand you're bitter. Rejection is difficult to process, especially for someone as proud as yourself. Proud. Yes, let's discuss pride. She kept her voice level, conversational. You humiliated me publicly, stole my future, chose my sister instead, and then tried to destroy me legally when I dared to write about how the system that allowed that brutality is fundamentally broken. And I'm the proud one? You defamed me, repeatedly. In print. I analyzed a system. You chose to see yourself in that analysis. Perhaps that says more about you than about me. His eyes narrowed. Clever words won't change facts. You're ruined, Elara. You have no money, no prospects, no future. You're here on the charity of a foreign duke who'll discard you the moment he tires of this, whatever this is. This is me refusing to disappear. But you're right about one thing. I have no prospects by your definition. No possibility of becoming someone's decorative wife. No chance of spending my life hosting dinners and pretending intelligence is a flaw. You took that future from me, Edmund, and I'm grateful. He actually looked surprised. Grateful. Desperately grateful. Because that future would have killed me. Slowly, over decades, you would have filed away every part of me that thought and felt and questioned until I was smooth enough not to cause you discomfort. Cordelia will let you do that. I never would have. So yes, thank you for choosing her. You saved me from a lifetime of suffocation. How noble! Cordelia's voice cut in. She'd followed Edmund, her face tight with barely controlled fury. The high-minded rejection of everything you spent your whole life preparing for. I spent my whole life being prepared, Elara corrected. Like a product. Like something to be packaged and sold. And when the buyer rejected the merchandise, I had to decide, did I want to find another buyer, or did I want to stop being for sale? So you became a radical, a scandal, a kept woman. I became myself. You should try it sometime, Cordelia. Though I suspect you'd find the experience unsettling. Requires independent thought. Cordelia's hand flew up. The slap never landed. Raphael caught her wrist, not roughly, but firmly. I wouldn't, he said pleasantly. Striking someone in public tends to make the striker look hysterical rather than righteous. Let go of me. Cordelia's voice was shrill. Gladly. He released her wrist. Miss Cordelia, congratulations on your upcoming wedding. I hope you enjoy married life with a man who views his wife as easily replaceable. How dare you? Speak truth. It's a terrible habit, I know. Ruins so many perfectly pleasant social gatherings. Raphael's smile was sharp. But then, I'm a foreigner. We're not bound by your rules about polite lies. Edmund's face was stone. This conversation is over. Elara, I suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself further. Embarrass myself? Edmund, I was abandoned at the altar in front of 600 people. I'm fairly certain I've reached my embarrassment ceiling. She looked around at the crowd, all watching with hungry fascination. But since we're here, let me ask you all something. You've been whispering about this scandal for months. The jilted bride, the stolen sister, the duke who changed his mind. You've turned it into entertainment. But has anyone asked why it happened? Why a man with all the power in the world chose to humiliate someone publicly rather than privately? Why the legal system allows him to weaponize it against criticism? Elara. Edmund's voice had an edge now. No. You wanted to silence me, sue me into submission, force me to apologize for having thoughts. So let's discuss it here, where everyone can hear. Let's talk about how marriage functions as economic control. How women are raised to have no value beyond wifehood. How men like you can discard women at will and face absolutely no consequences while the women are destroyed. You're making a scene. Edmund's tone was cold, dangerous. I'm making a point, and you're proving it beautifully. She turned to address the room directly. Look at him. Powerful, wealthy, titled, completely secure in his position. And look at me. Disgraced, sued, socially destroyed. We both participated in the same event, but only one of us paid a price for it. That's the system working exactly as designed. Enough. Edmund's voice cracked like a whip. Security, please escort Miss Whitcomb from the premises. On what grounds? Raphael's voice was soft, deadly. She was invited by a titled guest. She hasn't broken any laws. She's simply speaking. She's disturbing the peace. She's disturbing your comfort. There's a difference. 2 footmen appeared, looking deeply uncomfortable. Gentlemen, Elara said calmly, I'll save you the trouble. I've said what I came to say. She turned back to Edmund. Enjoy your victory, Duke Rothermere. Enjoy your lawsuit, your perfect bride, your unchallenged authority. I hope it brings you everything you deserve. She walked toward the exit, spine straight, head high. The crowd parted. But this time it was different. This time she saw faces that weren't just curious or contemptuous. Some looked thoughtful, some looked uncomfortable. Some, a few, but enough, looked like they were questioning things they'd never questioned before. She made it to the entrance hall before the voices started. Miss Whitcomb, wait. She turned. A young woman in a pale green dress couldn't have been more than 19. Behind her, 2 others. I just wanted to say, the girl's voice was shaking. I read your essay about marriage as transaction, and she looked around nervously. I'm engaged to a man I've met 4 times, and I've been so terrified, but everyone keeps telling me it's normal, that I'll adjust, that this is what women do. You don't have to. Elara's voice was gentle. You don't have to marry him. You don't have to adjust to your own diminishment. But I don't have a choice. My family needs the alliance. You always have a choice. The choice might be difficult, the consequences might be severe, but it exists. You're not property. You're a person. Tears were running down the girl's face now. Everyone says I'm being dramatic, that I'm too sensitive. Everyone is wrong. Elara gripped her hand. Your feelings are valid. Your fears are real. And you deserve better than a lifetime with someone you don't know, don't love, don't trust. Miss Whitcomb? One of the other women stepped forward, older, maybe 40, with sad eyes. I've been married 20 years. To a good man by all accounts. Wealthy, titled, respectable. And I've been miserable every single day. Your essays, they were the first time I saw my life described accurately. Thank you. More women gathered. Not many. The consequences of publicly aligning with her were too severe. But some. Enough. They thanked her, asked questions, shared stories, drew strength from her refusal to apologize for surviving. Raphael watched from a distance, not interfering, just present. When the crowd finally dispersed, he approached. Still think coming was a mistake? I think it was necessary. Whether it was wise remains to be seen. It was both. He offered his arm. Come on, let's get you home before Edmund recovers enough to do something dramatic. They were halfway to the carriage when Cordelia appeared, blocking their path. She looked different now, the sweetness stripped away, replaced by something raw and desperate. I didn't want to do it, she said without preamble. Elara stopped. What? The cathedral. Stealing Edmund, I didn't... Cordelia's voice cracked. Mother arranged it. Father approved it. Edmund approached them 3 weeks before the wedding, said he'd made a mistake, that he wanted the younger daughter, the sweeter one, the one who wouldn't challenge him. And you just agreed? What choice did I have? Cordelia's eyes were wild now. You don't understand what it's like being the second daughter, the pretty one, the one with no thoughts worth hearing. They made me understand that this was my only chance at security, that if I said no, I'd end up alone, unmarried, worthless. So you took my future to secure yours. Yes. No apology, just admission. Yes, I did, because I was terrified. And I'm still terrified, Elara, because I'm about to marry a man who chose me because I'm empty, because I won't challenge him, because I'm the safe option. Elara stared at her sister, at the desperation in her eyes, the fear. Then don't marry him. What? Don't marry him. Call it off. Walk away. I can't. The scandal, my reputation, will be destroyed. Yes, exactly like mine was. And you'll survive it, exactly like I'm surviving it. Elara's voice was hard. You made your choice, Cordelia. You chose security over integrity. So live with it. But don't stand here and ask me for absolution because you're starting to realize what you've bought. I was protecting myself by destroying me. I understand the logic. I even understand the fear. But understanding doesn't equal forgiveness. She pulled her arm from Raphael's and stepped closer to her sister. You want to know the difference between us? When the system tried to destroy me, I fought back. When it offered you everything at my expense, you took it. So no, I don't forgive you. And I won't comfort you when you realize you've built your life on quicksand. Cordelia's face crumpled. I hate you. No, you don't. You hate yourself. But it's easier to project that onto me. You're not better than me just because you chose poverty and scandal. You're right. I'm not better. I'm just different. I chose freedom over security. You chose the opposite. We'll both pay the price for our choices. She walked past Cordelia without looking back. In the carriage, Raphael was quiet for a long time. That was difficult, he finally said. That was necessary. You could have been kinder. Kindness would have been lying to her, telling her she didn't participate in my destruction, that she was just a victim of circumstance. Elara's voice was tired. She wasn't. She made a choice. I'm allowed to name that choice and refuse to absolve her of it. You are. He paused. I've never met anyone like you. Someone angry and difficult and barely surviving. Someone honest, brutally, uncompromisingly honest, even when dishonesty would be easier. He looked at her in the dim carriage light. You terrify me, Elara Whitcomb. Good. I terrify myself most days. They arrived back at Margaret's house to find it ablaze with light. That's not normal, Elara said slowly. They hurried inside. The drawing room was packed with people. Dr. Winters, Thomas Ashworth, a dozen other members of the intellectual circles, all talking excitedly. Margaret saw them and rushed over. You're famous. Or infamous. Possibly both. What happened? Your performance at the ball happened. Half of London is talking about it. The women you spoke to in the entrance hall? Apparently one of them was Lady Morrison's daughter. And Lady Morrison is furious, not at you, at Edmund, for making her daughter question her own engagement, for forcing her to confront what she's really agreeing to. That's unexpected. It's spreading. Dr. Winters thrust a newspaper at her. Early edition. They rushed it to print. The headline read, Scandalous Miss Whitcomb disrupts Waverley Ball. But was she wrong? The article was surprisingly balanced. It detailed the confrontation, quoted her words about the marriage system, and then, shockingly, included responses from several prominent women who admitted they'd experienced similar pressures. This is good, right? Elara asked uncertainly. This is revolutionary, Thomas Ashworth corrected. You've turned a personal scandal into a political movement. People are questioning things, arguing, taking sides. The Rothermere lawsuit isn't just about defamation anymore. It's a referendum on whether women can criticize the system that controls them. Edmund is going to escalate, Raphael said quietly. Let him. Elara felt something settling in her chest. Not peace exactly, but certainty. Let him escalate. Every time he tries to silence me, he proves my point. Every lawsuit, every threat, every attempt to destroy me just shows people exactly how the system works. You're weaponizing his attacks, Dr. Winters said, something like awe in her voice. I'm surviving them. If that survival happens to expose the brutality of the system, then that's a happy accident. The room erupted in discussion. Strategies, next steps, how to capitalize on the momentum. Elara let the noise wash over her, feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, real, tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, this disaster could transform into something meaningful. Raphael found her later, standing at the window watching the street. You did it, he said softly. Did what? Change the narrative. You're not the jilted bride anymore. You're the woman who fought back, who refused to be destroyed, who turned her pain into political action. He moved closer. You're extraordinary. I'm exhausted. Also extraordinary. His hand found hers in the darkness. Elara, I need to tell you something. Her heart stopped. If you're about to say you're leaving London, I'm about to say I'm staying. Indefinitely. Because watching you fight has been the most inspiring thing I've ever witnessed, and I want to see where this goes. He paused. I also want to see where we go, if you're interested in exploring that possibility. She turned to face him fully. Raphael, I have nothing. No money, no position, no future, beyond whatever I can scrape together through writing and rage. You have yourself, that's everything. You're a duke. You could have anyone. I don't want anyone. I want you. Difficult, furious, uncompromising you. His eyes were fierce. I want the woman who walked into a hostile ballroom and refused to flinch, who turned her devastation into revolution, who's brilliant and stubborn and completely unwilling to be anything other than exactly who she is. I'll ruin your reputation. I don't care. Society will say terrible things. Let them. I've spent my entire life in rooms full of people whose opinions I don't respect. Why would I suddenly start caring what they think? He gripped her shoulders. Elara, I'm not offering you rescue. I'm offering you partnership, a chance to build something neither of us could build alone. I don't know how to be someone's partner. I only know how to fight. Then we'll fight together. She looked at him, this impossible man who'd seen her at her worst and decided she was worth staying for. This is insane, she whispered. Completely. He smiled. Say yes anyway. She kissed him instead of answering. It was easier than finding words for the tangle of fear and hope and desperate gratitude in her chest. When they pulled apart, he was grinning. I'm taking that as a yes. Take it as a maybe. A very cautious, very terrified maybe. I'll take it. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Edmund was dropping the lawsuit. Not quietly, not with an apology. Just a terse statement through his solicitors that he was withdrawing the defamation claim in the interest of moving forward with his marriage. He's retreating, Margaret said, staring at the notice. Actually, retreating. Why? Elara couldn't process it. He was winning. The law was on his side. The law was, Dr. Winters interrupted. Public opinion wasn't. Your performance at the ball, the newspaper coverage, the conversations it started. He realized that continuing the lawsuit would just give you a larger platform, so he's cutting his losses. I won. The words felt strange in her mouth. I actually won. You survived, Raphael corrected, which, against someone like Edmund, is the same thing. Elara sank into a chair, feeling the weight of 6 months finally lifting. She wasn't fixed. She wasn't restored to her former position. But she'd fought the system that tried to destroy her, and she'd survived. More than survived. She'd changed the conversation. What happens now? She asked. Margaret smiled. Now? Now you get to choose, really choose, without a lawsuit hanging over your head, without the threat of prison. What do you want, Elara? She looked around the room, at Margaret, who'd given her shelter, at Dr. Winters and the others who'd given her purpose, at Raphael, who'd given her partnership. I want to keep writing, she said slowly. I want to keep fighting. I want to build something that makes the next abandoned bride's survival easier than mine was. Then that's what we'll do, Raphael said simply. Through the window, London was waking up to a new day. Somewhere out there, Edmund and Cordelia were preparing for a wedding. Her parents were probably congratulating themselves on cutting ties with their difficult daughter. But here, in this cluttered townhouse in Bloomsbury, surrounded by people who valued ideas over appearances, Elara Whitcomb was finally terrifyingly free. The woman who'd been broken at the altar had become someone new, someone stronger, someone unstoppable. Freedom, Elara discovered, was more complicated than she'd imagined. The lawsuit was gone. Yes, the immediate threat of legal destruction had evaporated like morning fog. But the aftermath was its own kind of battlefield, one fought with words and choices and the slow, grinding work of building a life from rubble. The first thing she did was write. Not an essay this time. A book. A full examination of how the marriage system functioned as economic control, peppered with case studies, legal analysis, and unflinching personal testimony. She wrote about the cathedral, about the months after, about every woman who'd written to her with similar stories. She wrote until her fingers cramped and her eyes burned, transforming rage into argument, pain into politics. It's brilliant, Dr. Winters said, reading the manuscript over 3 days. It's also unmarketable. No mainstream publisher will touch it. Then we'll find an unconventional one. They did. A radical press in Manchester agreed to print it, though they warned the print run would be small and the distribution limited to progressive bookshops. Elara didn't care. She wasn't writing for fame or profit. She was writing to leave a record. Proof that she'd existed, fought, refused to disappear. The book came out in March, 6 months after the cathedral disaster. The Gilded Cage, Marriage, Economics, and the Systematic Destruction of Female Autonomy by E. Whitcomb. The reviews were predictably split. The conservative papers called it dangerous feminist nonsense. The radical sheets declared it essential reading. Women's groups began discussing it in secret meetings. University students debated it in coffee houses. It sold out the first printing in 3 weeks. You're infamous, Margaret observed, reading a particularly scathing review that compared Elara to a disease infecting the social order. I prefer notorious. It sounds more intentional. Raphael had his own battles to fight. His extended stay in London had raised eyebrows among Spanish nobility. Letters arrived from his mother demanding he return home and fulfill his ducal obligations. His younger brother wrote suggesting that his fascination with a scandalous Englishwoman was damaging the family reputation. They want you to leave, Elara said, reading one particularly pointed missive over his shoulder. They want me to behave predictably. Unfortunately for them, I've never been particularly good at that. He tossed the letter aside. Besides, my estates are managed competently without me. The Duchy of Valentia won't collapse if I spend a year in London watching a revolution unfold. Is that what this is? A revolution? You tell me. You're the one changing how people think about marriage, autonomy, and power. That sounds revolutionary to me. But revolution, like freedom, was complicated. The backlash intensified as her book spread. Anonymous pamphlets appeared attacking her character, her morals, her sanity. Cartoons depicted her as everything from a witch to a prostitute. Someone started a rumor that she was actually a radical agitator funded by foreign anarchists intent on destroying British society. You should sue, Thomas Ashworth suggested after a particularly vicious cartoon appeared showing her as a snake poisoning innocent young women. And become what I'm fighting against? Someone who uses the legal system to silence criticism? Elara shook her head. Let them attack. Every piece of vitriol just proves my point about how society treats women who step out of line. The intellectual circles rallied around her. What had started as loose gatherings of radicals and freethinkers began organizing into something more structured. They called it the Women's Autonomy Society, though Margaret insisted on calling it Elara's Army of the Inconvenient. We need strategy, Dr. Winters announced at one of their weekly meetings. Elara's book has opened a conversation. Now we need to push that conversation into action. What kind of action? Someone asked. Legal reform, property rights for married women, educational access, the ability to make contracts without male permission. Dr. Winters pulled out a list that looked like it had been years in the making. We start small. Petitions, public forums, pressure on sympathetic members of parliament. We use Elara's story as a case study for why the current system is broken. You want to use me as a symbol? I want to use your experience as evidence. There's a difference. Dr. Winters met her eyes. You survived something designed to destroy you. That survival matters. It proves change is possible. It proves I was lucky. Lucky to have Margaret. Lucky to have you all. Lucky to have... She glanced at Raphael. Unexpected allies. Not every woman will have that. Which is exactly why we need systemic change instead of individual luck. Dr. Winters leaned forward. Elara, I know you're tired of being the scandal everyone discusses, but you're also the proof that resistance is survivable. We need that proof to convince others to risk resistance themselves. The work was exhausting. Meetings, planning sessions, drafting petitions, speaking at small gatherings where curious women came to hear the infamous Miss Whitcomb explain how she'd survived being discarded. Every appearance was a risk. She never knew if the audience would be supportive or hostile. Most were somewhere in between. Women who desperately wanted to believe change was possible, but were terrified of the cost. Men who found her arguments intellectually interesting but practically threatening. You're asking us to dismantle the entire social order, one Cambridge professor argued during a particularly heated debate. I'm asking you to question whether the social order deserves to exist in its current form, Elara countered. If your system only works by keeping half the population in economic and legal servitude, maybe it's not as civilized as you think. But marriage has functioned this way for centuries. So did slavery. Age doesn't make brutality acceptable. The room erupted, some in agreement, some in outrage. But they were talking, arguing, questioning. That was enough. Summer came, and with it, unexpected news. Cordelia's wedding had been postponed. No official reason given, but the rumors were spectacular. Some said Edmund had changed his mind again. Others whispered that Cordelia had fled. The truth, when it finally emerged through Margaret's society connections, was stranger. Cordelia had demanded changes to the marriage settlement. She what? Elara couldn't believe it. Insisted on maintaining separate property. Wanted legal guarantees about her autonomy within the marriage. Basically took your arguments and weaponized them in contract negotiations. Margaret was grinning. Edmund is furious. Apparently he thought he was getting a docile replacement and instead got someone who'd been reading radical feminist literature. She read my book, cover to cover, according to my sources, then used it as a bargaining manual. Elara didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So my betrayer became my student? Your betrayer realized she was about to make the same mistake you escaped. She's trying to protect herself using the tools you developed. Margaret's expression turned serious. I know you said you wouldn't forgive her. You don't have to. But you might want to acknowledge that your work is changing lives, even the lives of people who hurt you. The thought sat uncomfortably for days. When Cordelia's note arrived, Elara almost burned it unread. Instead, she opened it. Elara, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. But I needed you to know that I read your book. Every word. And I finally understood what you were trying to tell me at the Waverly Ball. I was terrified. I am still terrified. But I've spent the last 3 months renegotiating my marriage settlement, and Edmund is furious, and his lawyers think I'm insane, and I've never felt more powerful in my life. I used your arguments, your logic, your refusal to accept that this is just how things are. I don't know if Edmund will ultimately agree to my terms. If he doesn't, I'll call off the wedding. And yes, I'll face scandal and social death, exactly like you predicted. But I'll face it as myself, not as some man's convenient choice. You were right about everything, and I was a coward. I'm trying not to be one anymore. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that your survival taught me how to fight for mine. Elara read it 3 times. What will you do? Raphael asked, watching her face. Nothing. She made her choice, and she's living with the consequences. That's all any of us can do. She folded the letter carefully. But I hope she succeeds. I hope she gets her settlement changes. I hope she walks into that marriage with at least some protection. That's generous, considering what she did. It's not generous. It's pragmatic. Elara met his eyes. If Cordelia can use my work to protect herself, then maybe other women can too. Maybe the next abandoned bride won't have to build everything from scratch. She'll have language, arguments, precedent. That's worth more than my personal resentment. You're extraordinary. I'm exhausted. There's a difference. But the exhaustion was changing into something else. Not comfort. She'd probably never be comfortable again. But purpose. Direction. The sense that her destruction had been transformed into something constructive. The turning point came in September. A member of Parliament, Lord Hartwell, a progressive with a reputation for supporting controversial causes, requested a meeting. Elara arrived expecting another debate. Instead, he offered her something unprecedented. I want to introduce legislation, he said without preamble. The Married Women's Property Act, allowing married women to own property in their own right, make contracts, keep their own earnings. It won't pass immediately, probably won't pass for years, but we have to start the conversation. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to testify. Parliamentary committee, public record. Your story, your analysis, your evidence. Lord Hartwell leaned forward. Miss Whitcomb, you've done something remarkable. You've taken a personal scandal and transformed it into political discourse. People are listening. Not everyone, not even most people, but enough. Enough to make this legislation worth proposing. Testifying means exposing myself. Again, publicly, officially. Yes, it means becoming the face of this reform. It means every conservative in England will have a target for their outrage. He paused. It also means the possibility of actual legal change, not just essays and discussions, but real, enforceable rights for women. Elara looked at Raphael, who'd accompanied her. His expression was neutral, leaving the decision entirely to her. If I testify, Edmund will retaliate. He'll make my life hell. Probably, Lord Hartwell agreed. He'll also prove your point beautifully. A powerful man destroying a woman for daring to demand legal rights? That's exactly the kind of example that convinces moderates to support reform. You want to use me as bait. I want to use your courage as catalyst. There's a difference. She thought about the cathedral, about Margaret's house, about every woman who'd written to thank her for naming their pain, about Cordelia, renegotiating her marriage settlement with stolen arguments. I'll do it, she said. The testimony was scheduled for November, 3 months to prepare, to anticipate every attack, to armor herself for the most public exposure yet. Raphael stayed through all of it, despite increasingly desperate letters from Spain demanding his return. Why are you still here? Elara asked one night, watching him read through her testimony draft. Because you're here. That's not a reason. That's an evasion. He set down the papers, looked at her directly. Because watching you fight has taught me more about courage than 30 years of aristocratic privilege. Because I want to see how this ends. Because... He paused. Because I'm in love with you, and I have been since you walked into that ballroom like you were going to war. The words hung in the air between them. Raphael, I have nothing to offer you. No title, no wealth, no position. I'm a scandal with a radical reputation and a target on my back. You have yourself. That's everything I want. You could go home, find someone appropriate, someone who won't complicate your life. I don't want appropriate. I want you." He moved closer. "Elara, I know you're terrified of dependence. I know you fought too hard for your freedom to surrender it to anyone. But partnership isn't surrender. It's choosing to face the world with someone beside you instead of alone. I don't know how to be someone's partner. I've spent my whole life either performing or surviving. Then we'll learn together." His eyes were fierce. "Come to Spain with me, after the testimony, after you've said your piece and changed the conversation. Come see what life looks like outside the system that tried to destroy you." "Raphael, not as my dependent, not as my mistress, as my wife, if you'll have me, as my equal partner, with legal protections written into the marriage contract that would make even Cordelia's negotiations look timid." Her heart stopped. "You're asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to choose a future, with me, on terms we designed together." He pulled out a folded document. "I had my solicitors draw up a marriage settlement. You maintain all property rights. You keep your own earnings. You have legal autonomy. If we have children, you have equal say in their upbringing. If the marriage ends, and it won't, but if it does, you leave with everything you brought in plus half of what we built together." She stared at the document. It was everything she'd been arguing for, everything her book demanded, everything that the British legal system said was impossible. This is radical. This is practical. In Spain, the laws are different, more flexible. We can structure this to protect both of us. He smiled. "I'm not asking you to disappear into my life, Elara. I'm asking if you want to build something new together, something neither of us could build alone." "Why would you give me this much power?" "Because I want a partner, not a possession. Because I value your mind too much to cage it. Because," he gripped her hands, "because loving you means loving your fierce, uncompromising, revolutionary self. And that self requires protection, not control." She looked at this impossible man who'd seen her at her worst and decided she was worth staying for, who'd watched her fight and chosen to fight beside her, who was offering her something she'd never imagined possible, marriage as partnership instead of prison. "Yes," she whispered. His smile could have lit London. The parliamentary testimony happened on a cold November morning. The committee room was packed. Journalists, observers, members of parliament who'd come to watch the infamous Miss Whitcomb either vindicate herself or self-destruct. Edmund was there, sitting in the back, watching with those cold eyes. Elara stood at the witness table, hands steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Miss Whitcomb," the committee chairman began, "you've submitted a written testimony arguing for married women's property rights. Would you care to summarize your position?" She'd practiced this, rehearsed it 100 times. But standing there, facing the men who would decide whether her suffering meant anything, the prepared words evaporated. Instead, she told the truth. "I was raised to be perfect. Every skill, every accomplishment, every moment of my life was designed to make me a suitable wife. And when the man I was promised to decided I was unsuitable, I had nothing. No legal rights to protect me, no economic independence to fall back on, no power to challenge the decision. I was simply disposable." The room was silent. "The current legal system treats women as property that passes from father to husband. We cannot own property, cannot make contracts, cannot keep our own earnings. We exist in a legal twilight where our only value is tied to a man's willingness to keep us." She looked around the room, meeting eyes. "And when that willingness ends, through death, divorce, abandonment, we are left with nothing. No matter how much we contributed, how hard we worked, how brilliant we were. Nothing." "Miss Whitcomb," one committee member interrupted, "many would argue that the protection of a good husband is sufficient." "A good husband, yes. And what of the bad ones? What of the ones who view their wives as decorative furniture? What of the ones who discard women at will, knowing those women have no legal recourse?" She leaned forward. "Gentlemen, you've built a system that assumes all men are benevolent protectors, but you've given women no protection from the ones who aren't. That's not civilization. That's tyranny dressed in silk." Another member spoke up. "But surely the current system has worked for centuries." The current system works beautifully for powerful men. It's catastrophic for everyone else. Elara pulled out her book, held it up. I've documented 200 cases of women destroyed by this system. 200 stories of women who contributed everything to marriages and walked away with nothing when those marriages ended. 200 examples of why legal reform isn't radical. It's overdue. You're advocating for the destruction of marriage as an institution. I'm advocating for the destruction of marriage as ownership. There's a difference. Her voice was strong now, certain. Marriage should be a partnership between equals. It should be entered into freely, maintained through mutual respect, and ended without destroying one party completely. The current system allows none of that. It's an economic transaction where women are the commodity being traded. Edmund stood up in the back. This is absurd. Miss Whitcomb is bitter about her personal situation and projecting that bitterness onto society. Duke Rothermere, the chairman's voice was sharp. You're not a committee member. Please sit down. I'm the man she's slandering. I have a right to respond to these accusations. What accusations? Elara turned to face him directly. I haven't named you. I haven't described the cathedral. I've simply stated facts about legal rights. If you hear yourself in that description, perhaps that says more about you than about me. Their eyes locked across the room. A year ago, she would have flinched, would have apologized, would have made herself smaller to accommodate his comfort. Now she held his gaze until he looked away. The testimony continued for 3 hours. Question after question, attack after attack. By the end, Elara was exhausted but unbroken. Thank you, Miss Whitcomb, the chairman finally said. This committee will take your testimony under advisement. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even really an acknowledgement. But it was a record. Official, documented proof that she'd stood in front of power and demanded change. That night, the newspapers exploded. Half called her testimony brilliant and necessary. Half called it dangerous feminist propaganda. Both sides agreed on one thing. Elara Whitcomb had changed the conversation permanently. You did it, Raphael said, reading through the coverage. You actually did it. I testified. Whether I changed anything remains to be seen. You changed everything. Look at this. He pointed to an editorial. They're actually discussing married women's property rights. Seriously discussing them. 6 months ago, that conversation didn't exist. Margaret burst in, waving a letter. Cordelia called off the wedding. Elara's head snapped up. What? Edmund refused her settlement demands, so she called it off, publicly, with a statement that sounded remarkably similar to your testimony. Margaret was grinning fiercely. She's ruined, obviously, but she's ruined on her own terms. Does she need help? She's asking if she can join the Women's Autonomy Society. Margaret's expression was complicated. I know you haven't forgiven her. You don't have to, but she's fighting now, in her own way. Elara thought about her sister. Sweet, passive Cordelia who'd stolen a future and was now destroying her own in the name of autonomy. Tell her yes. Tell her she's welcome. She met Margaret's surprised look. I don't forgive her for what she did, but I respect what she's doing now. That's enough. The months that followed were a blur of activity. The Women's Autonomy Society grew from a handful of radicals to a legitimate organization. Petition drives, public forums, pressure campaigns on sympathetic politicians. The Married Women's Property Act wouldn't pass for years, maybe decades, but the conversation had started, and Elara had started it. In January, exactly 1 year after the cathedral disaster, she married Raphael in a small ceremony at Margaret's house. No elaborate dress, no 600 witnesses, just the people who mattered, the legal protections they'd negotiated and vows they'd written themselves. I promise to be your partner, Raphael said, never your owner, to value your mind as much as your heart, to fight beside you, not for you. I promise to trust you, Elara answered, even though trust terrifies me, to build something new with you, to choose us every day without losing myself. It wasn't traditional. It wasn't what society expected. It was perfect. The letter from her father arrived 2 weeks later. Brief, businesslike, utterly devoid of emotion. He'd heard about the marriage. He assumed it was a love match given Raphael's title and wealth. He supposed congratulations were in order. If Elara ever chose to reconcile with her family, the door was open. She burned the letter without responding. Some bridges, once destroyed, weren't worth rebuilding. They left for Spain in March. Elara stood on the deck of the ship, watching England fade into fog, and felt the weight of the last year finally lifting. "Regrets?" Raphael asked, appearing beside her. "Thousands. But none about leaving." "What about the society, the reform work?" "Will continue without me. Dr. Winters is a better organizer anyway, and I'll keep writing. Distance doesn't stop that." "What will you write about?" She smiled. "Everything. Spain, marriage, what it means to build a life on your own terms, how survival transforms into revolution." She looked at him. "How love looks when it's chosen rather than arranged." "That's a lot of topics." "I'm a lot of person. You're stuck with all of it." "I'm counting on it." Spain was everything England wasn't: warm, vibrant, less rigidly structured. The Duchy of Valentia sprawled across hills covered in olive groves and vineyards. The estate staff looked at her with curiosity rather than judgment. Here, she wasn't a scandal. She was simply the Duke's unusual English wife with the fierce opinions and the radical books. She threw herself into learning Spanish, understanding the local politics, getting to know the people whose lives were affected by ducal decisions. Raphael had been right. The estates ran competently without constant oversight, which meant they had time to build something new. They started a school, for girls primarily, though boys were welcome, teaching not just decorative accomplishments, but mathematics, philosophy, science, languages, everything Elara had been denied until she fought for it herself. "You're creating an army of difficult women," Raphael observed, watching her debate Aristotle with a 14-year-old who was absolutely refusing to accept his position on female inferiority. "I'm creating an army of thinking women. They'll decide for themselves whether to be difficult." Letters arrived regularly from England. The Women's Autonomy Society was thriving. Cordelia had become one of their most effective organizers. Her experience of nearly marrying Edmund gave her credibility with women terrified of similar fates. The Married Women's Property Act was still being debated, but the debate was happening, and Elara's book kept selling. New editions, translations, distribution through increasingly mainstream channels. The scandalous Miss Whitcomb's radical manifesto was becoming required reading in progressive circles across Europe. "You're famous," Margaret wrote in one letter. "Actually famous. People quote your work in Parliament now. Academics cite you in journals. You've become what you never tried to be, a symbol." Elara read the letter on her balcony overlooking the Spanish hills, feeling the warm sun on her face. Famous. A symbol. The woman who'd survived being discarded and transformed that survival into revolution. It wasn't the future she'd been raised to expect. It was infinitely better. 2 years after leaving England, she got an unexpected letter. From Edmund. She almost burned it unread, but curiosity won. "Miss Whitcomb, or should I say Duchess de Aragon, I won't pretend this letter is anything but self-serving. I'm writing because my own marriage has collapsed, my reputation is in tatters, and I find myself in the uncomfortable position of being exactly what you accused me of being. A man who destroyed lives because he could. Cordelia's refusal to marry me started conversations I didn't anticipate. Questions about my character, my treatment of women, my fitness for the responsibilities I hold. Your testimony gave those questions legitimacy. Your book gave them language. I am, by every measure that matters, ruined, much like I ruined you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that you were right about everything. The system is broken, and men like me are the breaking mechanism. I hope Spain treats you better than England did. Rothermere." Elara read it twice, then handed it to Raphael. "What will you do?" he asked. "Nothing. He wants absolution I'm not qualified to give." She looked out over the estate, at the school in the valley where young women were learning to question everything. He participated in a system that destroyed people. Now that system is turned on him. That's justice, not tragedy. "You've become hard." "I've become realistic." Edmund didn't write that letter because he's sorry. He wrote it because he's lost power and wants reassurance that losing power doesn't make him a monster. She met Raphael's eyes. But it does. It absolutely does. The only reason he wasn't a monster before is because the system protected monsters like him. What about Cordelia? She hurt you too. Cordelia's trying to make amends through action. She's fighting the system that created her betrayal. Edmund is wallowing in self-pity and expecting praise for recognizing his own cruelty. There's a difference. She burned Edmund's letter in the fireplace that night, watching the paper curl and blacken. Some stories didn't deserve closure. Some simply deserved to end. 5 years after the cathedral, Elara stood in the school she'd built and watched 30 young women debate property rights with the passion of people who'd never been told their opinions didn't matter. "You did this," Raphael said, watching beside her. "We did this. You provided the resources. You provided the vision, the courage, the absolute refusal to accept that this is just how things are." He smiled. "These girls are going to change Spain, probably Europe, possibly the world. These girls are going to change their own lives. That's enough." But she knew he was right. The students graduating from their school weren't going to accept traditional limitations. They were going to question, challenge, demand. They were going to be difficult. They were going to be magnificent. Letters still came from England. The Married Women's Property Act had finally passed, 5 years after her testimony. Limited, compromised, not everything she'd hoped for, but real. Actual legal change that gave women rights they'd never had before. "You started this," Dr. Winters wrote. "Your survival made this possible. Thank you." Elara kept the letter. Someday, when she was old and her memory of the cathedral had faded to a distant ache, she'd read it again. Remember that her destruction had built something worth building. But for now, she had work to do, a school to run, students to teach, essays to write, a partnership with Raphael that deepened every year into something she'd never imagined possible. Marriage as true partnership, built on respect and choice and the freedom to be fully herself. The woman who'd been broken at the altar was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd taken devastation and transformed it into revolution. Someone who'd survived being discarded and used that survival to prove that women were more than decorative commodities waiting to be chosen. Someone who'd been told her only value was in making a good match, and had instead made herself invaluable. The story that started with humiliation ended with freedom. Real, earned, fiercely protected freedom. And that, Elara thought, watching the sun set over the Spanish hills she now called home, was the greatest victory possible. Not revenge, not redemption, just the radical act of becoming exactly who she was meant to be, and forcing the world to witness it.